TMH English Daily News. Our headlines today includes AU High Representative for the Horn of Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo, calls for the lifting of all the blockade that's been imposed on the Tigray region. UN says aid operation in Tigray have largely reduced or even suspended, and Ethiopian officials have been accused of extorting Tigrayan detainees in their detention centers. As we move on to our main news for today, AU High Representative for the Horn of Africa, Olusegun Obasanjo, calls for the lifting of all the blockade that's been imposed on the Tigray region. While briefing the African Union Peace and Security Council, Obasanjo calls for urgent response to the dire humanitarian situation in Tigray. He urged lifting of the blockade and restoring services as confidence-building measures. According to the AU's Political Affairs Office, the High Representative observed how limitations in access to essential services aggravate the already dire humanitarian situation. Chief Obasanjo also underlined the imperative for the political solution, as well as the regional and international coordination, as well as coherence. Subsequent to the PSC briefing, Obasanjo briefed diplomats of the AU partners according to additional information from a think tank called Amani Africa. This is the third time that the High Representative briefed the AU for the Peace and Security Council since his appointment in August of 2021. The Patriarch of the Tigray Orthodox Tewahedo Church vows to work hard to document this ongoing genocide. The Patriarch of the Tigray Orthodox Tewahedo Church that was formally constituted recently announced that it will work to return the seat of the church to the seat of Abuna Salama, as well as the founder and the first patriarch of the church in Aksum City. It also vowed to work hard to document the genocide perpetrated against all of the people of Tigray. Many religious leaders of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church have been complicit in the ongoing genocide by openly blessing as well as supporting this ongoing war, which has claimed the lives of priests and even destroyed religious institutions as well. Fuel and cash shortage have forced humanitarian operations to virtual standstill in Ethiopia's war-hit Tigray region. In a briefing note released on Thursday, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said that aid deliveries in Tigray have been largely reduced or even suspended, including critical distributions of food, water, health, and nutrition services included. It is said that no fuel had been allowed into the region since August 2 last year, excepting 2 trucks in November, which, while a cash crunch had left local nonprofits deeply in debt and struggling to pay their salaries since the month of June 2021. OSHA said overall 1,339 trucks have entered into the region of Tigray from Semera since the 12th of July, which represents about 9% of the required supplies that have been needed to meet the vast scale of humanitarian needs within the Tigray region. Tigray has for months been subjected to this ongoing blockade, and the United States have also accused the Ethiopian government of blocking all aid. Although aid workers have been able to airlift life-saving medical supplies to Tigray, the supplies have fallen far short of what is required, and the UN agency said with residents resorting to desperate, as well as including bed sheets to make gauzes applicable. Malnutrition continues to soar in the Tigray region as well. OSHA said with 6.4% of screened children diagnosed with severe acute malnutrition between February 1st to the 7th, warning that supplies used to treat such cases were completely depleted or even almost entirely exhausted. Malnutrition rates among screened pregnant and lactating women in Tigray reached 95% during the week in Tigray. Last month, the UN's World Food Program said that the nearly 40% of people in Tigray were suffering and an extreme lack of food, with fuel shortages forcing aid workers to deliver medicines and other crucial supplies by foot. Civilians held without charge accused the Ethiopian security officers of systematic extortion and an increasing abuse. Al Jazeera talked to former detainees and their families and compiled this report. As profiling and detentions of Tigrayans increased, so did the extortion of detainees by police and prison wardens, according to the victims and the relatives of these victims who spoke to Al Jazeera over this past month. "We have become a commodity in prison," said one victim who spent up to 7 months detained in an Addis Ababa facility until his family paid for his release. He continues to say, "They slapped a price on you, then your loved ones would have to find the money and buy your freedom," he lamented. Prison wardens, government prosecutors, and even officials from the local attorney general's office are among those alleged to have demanded expert bribes for release. Detainees also told Al Jazeera that payments are often required to secure medicine and in some cases to use toilets and showers throughout their indefinite detentions as well. Another victim told Al Jazeera that the police phoned to demand a 2,500 birr or $50 payment to cover cleaning and drinking water for his imprisoned brother. Sources said prisoners were getting 2 pieces of bread to eat a day. Other detainees who didn't pay for water were eating this without ever washing their hands at all. Some relatives of the prisoners described being asked to deliver as much as 500,000 Ethiopian birr or $10,000 in ransom payments. But in Ethiopia, where the average human income is less than $1,000, majority of detainees have either languished behind bars failing to pay and their impoverished families unable to afford their release prices. In response to the queries from Al Jazeera, the allegations of extortion, and an official from Ethiopia's Ministry of Justice conceded that he was aware of the cases of the bribery but denied that the problem was systematic and said that the action would be taken to stamp out the practice, but alleged victims told Al Jazeera of pervasive extortion as well as increasing abuse. Family members described receiving phone calls from mysterious middlemen who would instruct them on how to transfer the sums of money and demanded to specific bank accounts as well. Wardens are said to take particular care to ensure that there are food shortages and enough beatings to induce regular payments. The victims said detention centers were severely overcrowded, with 500 to 600 people in hall that was not designed for more than 150 people total. In the detention centers, there were men as old as 88. I would estimate there was many as 50 minors if you are referring to anyone under 18, as one of the victims came out and said. The guards assume that the returnees from the Middle East have money, so they would also beat them to get some ransom as well. The same victim estimates he paid more than 50,000 birr, just over $1,000, to prison guards to shower, use the toilet, as well as to be allowed to visit a clinic for the thyroid and bronchitis he says he was contracted while behind those same bars. Justice Ministry spokesman Awel admitted that he was aware of the reports of mistreatment of prisoners and the arrests of minors, but said that the erosion and suspension of civil rights are said to be expected under a national state of emergency. During January, Ethiopian Orthodox Christians celebrate Christmas and Timkat, a holy day to commemorate the baptism of Christ. Detainees said that they were an upscale in the ransom payments, which police and middlemen took extreme advantage of, and the desperation of their families to be reunited during such times for the holidays. Middlemen are also said to have paid and preyed on the detainees with family members abroad. Tigrayans in the United States as well as the UK also told Al Jazeera they were asked to pay as much as 500,000 birr as well as $10,000 to free their loved ones as soon as possible. One of the ransom payments made from the UK said if they think they can get euros and dollars from you, they become very valuable as hostage within the detained prison. A weapons proliferation expert says Israel and Iran, both supplying Ethiopia's military and civilians, are in the firing lane. Stijan Misr, an expert in proliferation, wrote on the Jewish Chronicle that in a war on Tigray, Israeli and Iranian drones are flying side by side. Ethiopia has also been a land of contradictions, so perhaps it shouldn't be a surprise that its military appears to be harnessing drones supplied by 2 deadly enemies in Israel as well as Iran to strike its own enemies. Before conflict broke out in November of 2020, the Ethiopian military, wholly reliant as well as Israeli drones for remotely controlled reconnaissance. As the 15-month-long conflict unfolded, the Ethiopian government approached foreign backers such as the UAE, Turkey, Iran to supply armed drones, which have since killed hundreds of civilians and destroyed civilian targets as well. This could mean that Israeli UAVs will be tasked with locating targets for Iranian Mohajer 6Ss, as Mizr said. Consequently, the Tigray war might go down in history as the first conflict in which Israeli and Iranian UAVs operate together on the same side. Since the year began, at least 108 have been killed, 75 injured by airstrikes allegedly carried out by the Ethiopian government, Air Force, and the UN estimates on the 10th of January an airstrike reportedly by the drone hit a flour mill, killing 17 civilians, injuring 21, of which most of them were women. The ready availability of armed drones enables operators to hit targets almost anywhere, while not showering their hands, an expert noted. He said that his includes targets in better-known territories of the West Allies in the Middle East, adding it also includes the little-to-known regions of Tigray and Ethiopia's neglected war as well. As the list of regions affected by the armed drones that grow in Iran's involvement in Ethiopia should be of concern to Israel especially. The expert warns that Iran will use these drones for political influence as well as to imply terror. Our final news for today, Tigray's second largest hospital has terminated almost all services due to the blockade that's been imposed in the Tigray region. Aksum Referral Hospital is the second largest hospital in Tigray. It has the potential to provide medical treatment to 3 million people across the state, but its staff members now say that the hospital has been forced to terminate much of its services due to this total siege that's been on their region. Let's take a listen.
The only reason we come to the hospital is simply not to shut it down completely. We send off nearly all patients and treat only few of them with what we have. Meanwhile, many are dying of shortage of medical supplies.
Another health officer also had this to say.
The only reason we come to the hospital is simply not to shut it down completely. We send off nearly all patients and treat only few of them with what we have. Meanwhile, many are dying of shortage of medical supplies.
The Ethiopian government, including their allies, have imposed this siege on the people of Tigray for the last 7 months, denying access to medical supplies, food, fuel, cash, and other services as well. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.